Okay, welcome everyone. This is Dr. Andrea Palmioli from the Department of Architecture and Built Environment from the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China. Today is our last seminar of this series that we have started already 3 weeks ago. The title of this seminar is Horizontal Metropolis Yangtze River Delta Entangling Capitals, Idealizing Rural, Media Multi-Narratives between Metrofittings and Retroactive Pastoralism. The scope and the aims of the seminar is to foreground current and emerging media narratives, voicing rural contents creator, constructing and idealizing a citizen-oriented image of the countryside. We aim to question the spectacularizing of the rural space, pastoral and idyllic narratives, and potential risk of widening rural-urban divide. Let me welcome our guest speaker and chair panels. Our first guest is Professor Jian Lin from the Department of Modern Languages and Literature, Rhodes College University, who will present Rediscovering the Chinese Countryside in the Age of Social Media. We will follow with Professor Jian Lin from the School of from the School of Journalism and Communication, Chinese University of Hong Kong, who will present Wang Hong, Creator Culture and the Rural China. And he will be followed by Professor Wang from the Department of Entrepreneurship, Marketing and Management System, Nottingham University Business School in China, with her cultural gentrification and sense of place in rural areas. And the last speakers of today will be Francesca Valsecci, who will join on site from the College of Design and Innovation, Tunji University, presenting ecological entanglement in rural-urban relationship. At the end of this presentation, we will initiate the debate and the discussion with our discussant, Professor Filippo Gilardi from the School of International Communication, Faculty of Humanities and Social Science, University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China, and Professor David Kiwuwa from School of International Studies, Faculty of Humanities and Social Science from the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China. A warm welcome to everyone. And Professor Lin, please feel free to start at your best convenience.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much for having me on this panel. This is a topic that I personally is very interested in, partially because maybe I spend a lot of time, maybe way too much time watching these videos of the countryside online. So, well, since we're going to talk about the media representation of the Chinese countryside, I couldn't resist but start my talk with a very short video, just so as to see what kind of video we're looking at today. It's about just 1 minute. All right. Well, I think many of our panelists probably know her. Well, she called herself Dianxi Xiaoge, which means little girl from the Yunnan province. And she's one of those Chinese rural micro celebrity that has on YouTube alone has 10 million subscribers. And the video we just saw, 1 minute one, is a kind of shortened version, abbreviated version from a video she uploaded 3 years ago. So Dianxi Xiaoge is well, she's among this group of very fastly growing cohort, or some people would call it a growing army of Chinese rural content creators that had become a phenomenon in China since 2019, 2020. So today, since I'm in humanities, I enjoy reading these videos and mostly from the textual analysis perspective. But I'm going to talk about the three groups of rural micro-celebrities that I enjoyed watching and have some thoughts about. But before we do that, I'd like to quickly say just a few words about the two components that I think involved in this phenomenon. The first part being this rediscovering of or repackaging or reimagining of the Chinese countryside. I think this component, first of all, kind of demonstrated this sentiment from the or phenomenon from this disenchantment to re-enchantment with Chinese rural area. Well, as we know, since the late 1970s, with the economic reform and this massive migration from rural to urban, the significant decline of rural population led to a series of challenges for Chinese kind of countryside. And gradually, Chinese rural areas became associated with the idea of such as isolation, depopulation, hollow village, aging, or even kind of an idea of decay. But at the same time, the cities, they're not only being favored for better economic opportunities, but also discursively established as being modern and progressive. However, in recent years, we began to see that, well, actually, the micro-celebrity, the Wang Hong, where I'm going to talk about, in this talk, they all have worked in the city, but decided to go back to their hometown and started a new kind of a business or career there. There are many reasons to that. Well, first of all, like as we know, the institutional barriers such about the hukou system, that's one of them. And overall, the sense of kind of displacement, the sense of rootlessness of these migrant workers in the city, that's also partially the reason. And also fastly increasing cost of living in the city, that's another one. So overall, this re-enchantment with the Chinese rural area, of course, showcasing kind of the promising development of Chinese countryside. But on the other hand, we need to see that it also demonstrates the predicament of Chinese economy as well as urbanization at this time. The other component in this phenomenon is that this happened in the age of social media. And there are many dimensions to that. There are many kind of moving puzzles to that. And within this rural kind of techno entrepreneurship, there are the new identities. There are the rural influencers. There are the formats they choose to use. There are short videos, live streaming, e-commerce. And beyond that, there's the digital infrastructure component, right? This wouldn't be able to happen without the widespread use of smartphones, and especially the affordable domestic brand, the networks, and the social media kind of reaching out into small towns and the rural area. And there's also the platform and state and a platform kind of pushing power behind that. So these are all the components that each of them merit its own study kind of in terms of the behind this phenomenon. But what I mainly want to talk about is three groups of Wang Hong, rural micro-celebrity, that I personally really enjoy watching. So the first group, they're the ones who brand themselves as the new farmer, 新农人, and they are what Dr. Lin called them, the very unlikely kind of a creative class. And I want to talk about quickly two of them. So first one, this is Qiaofu Jiumei. She's one of the very, very first pioneers in this whole phenomenon. So like her kind of a fellow Wang Hong, she went back to her hometown, started with the uploading video demonstrating her countryside cooking style, and then began to showcase the local agricultural production, and then that's transformed into e-commerce business. And she was kind of being recognized as the leading figure of the rural kind of a poverty alleviative campaign. And similar to her, and I'm sure many of the panelists also know them. This two-man team in Jiangxi province, they call themselves Huanong Xiongdi, the Chinese farmer brothers. And both of them worked in Shenzhen in the factory. And when they returned to their hometown, they first started with the business of raising this larger rodent, raise them for meat consumption, and called bamboo shoots. But their business was interrupted. Actually, was shut down because of COVID, and now they transformed into kind of the e-commerce about their local specialty, a type of orange. So between this this group, I think compared to the ones that we're going to see later, their videos are very crude, has this crude quality, no fascinating kind of a cinematography or kind of editing or post-production work. But I wanted to say that this amateurship is actually kind of worked to their advantage, created this aura of genuineness. But behind this amateurship, there is also kind of a component of rural information elite and what kind of role they played. For example, in the first case, she was assisted by her cousin who specialized in who majored in media studies in college, and for the Huanong Xiongdi and some of the other creators, their experience in their kind of a factory worker experience in the urban area. So to a certain extent, baptized by the urban middle class, especially middle class values and taste, they are able to translate this kind of aesthetics into appealing power in their video. So I think that's a very important to emphasize how the amateurship is used to their advantage. And the other thing, what people are consuming is people enjoy watching so-called this Yuanshengtai countryside. Yuanshengtai can roughly be translated as this untainted native environment or untainted native condition. But I would, if we look at their video, we can see that they actually maintain a very careful balance between showcasing the rusticity aspects of the countryside and kind of still control it, making it within the attractive kind of range. Another thing worth mentioning about this group is that their video kind of showcase really is part of the rural revitalization phenomenon and campaign. Their video showcase that it's trying to say that the Chinese countryside, they're no longer a land of kind of abandonment, but rather a place of vitality and new economic opportunities. But from there, it's also worth to asking that this kind of who are really benefited from this new economic opportunity. So here we can see Jiu Mei, the first lady, she was featured in the headline news saying a former noodle factory migrant worker making such and such through e-business. And for Huanong Xiongdi, I just saw just a couple months ago, they hosted the Tsinghua, the kind of a rural revitalization working group from Tsinghua University. So both of them are featured prominently in the overall rural revitalization campaign. And the other two things about them, actually probably about most of the digital influencers, is that their video, right? Even though they're selling the local products, they're kind of selling their video, but it is more about packaging their personalities and building the connections. So to a certain extent, almost we can say that selling the local kind of product is actually a byproduct of selling their personality. So therefore, the affective labors, the emotional labors kind of involved in their work is also one important thing to study. And for them, they're of course kind of making fortune from the e-commerce business, but they are also capitalizing their video, capitalizing on, in their case, very interestingly, capitalizing on the ordinariness of them, on the accessibility of them, and also capitalizing on the connectedness and intimacy of them. But I wanted to say that, well, again, I spent a lot of time watching these videos online, especially regarding the rural information elite. This kind of has been changing, especially in the past couple of years, because I saw there are a lot of kind of rural Wang Hong. They no longer have the experience of living in the city or working in the city, and I think that's a new development overall in this phenomenon. The second one I want to talk about is the video we saw at the beginning. This is 电西小哥. So we can see that, well, first of all, she's from Yunnan. So this ethnicity plays a very important component in her video demonstration. She produced a lot of kind of eye-catching dishes with the local special, especially ethnic ingredients. So that's definitely one aspect. But beyond that, people see in her videos, her video presented this very poetic countryside sceneries and a very idyllic rural life. And we see in her video always this very simple and innocent and harmonious family life, as well as the communal life in her village. And sometimes when I watch her video, I feel like her video demonstrated a different tempo, really a different tempo, different temporality of living. So as if we're experiencing a different time space, kind of different from the urban living feelings. But for her, and there are many similar Wang Hong in that countryside Wang Hong in that category. But for her, I wanted to say that I think many scholars have discussed this pastoralism, this pastoral myth, as demonstrated in her video, is not innocent, but rather is very normative or prescriptive and is power infused. So to a certain extent, it is not her camera captured this reality, but rather her video kind of reconstructed this very gentrified hyper-reality. And the hyper-reality and performed, the whole video performed as a kind of simulacrum according to the discursive imagination of the rural idol. And so people also consume her video because to consuming this genuineness and kind of a homemade products, but and her video try to kind of advocate for this non-profit driven business. But I wanted to, so for example, she makes this 鲜花饼, kind of a roast cake, but this freshly baked roast cake, or thanks to the kind of e-business infrastructure, they can be speedily delivered to the consumers within 1 or 2 days. So overall, we can see this anti-capitalist or anti kind of a commercialist sentiment. The irony is that this cannot be achieved. This can only be achieved based on the very logic and logistic of modern capitalism. So overall, in her video, we see this aestheticized, this romanticized everyday life that really blurs the boundary of this art and art fantasy and life. But for her, I wanted to kind of go beyond a little bit, and I don't know if my panelists or audience see some of the other similar YouTubers. There are actually many of them. They have exactly the same aesthetic style, kind of same cinematography, similar background music, almost, and not just in China. There are YouTubers from Cambodia, for example, the one on screen. There are ones from Vietnam, and just by the screenshot, you can see they follow very, very similar formula. So this really lead me to begin to think, this kind of a video production almost becomes an industry. This is streamlined. They're supposed to be unique, but if you picture them together, this kind of a streamlined production based on a very homogeneous but transnational aesthetics. So I think this also, if you are interested, really worth looking further into. And the last YouTuber, Li Ziqi, I think she is probably kind of known by many people. And well, last 2 years, she stopped uploading video because of the lawsuit she got involved with her kind of MCN companies. But in Li Ziqi, well, she still remains as one of the most influential rural micro celebrities in China. So in Li Ziqi's video, similar to what we saw in the previous one, she demonstrates romantic and very kind of a calm, pleasing, therapeutic lifestyles. But beyond that, her video kind of demonstrate a cultural landscape, the cultural landscape that appeals to, let's say, if the previous like Dian Xi Xiaoge's video kind of appeals to people's city escaping mentality. It's about the anxiety of modern urban living. So Li Ziqi's video actually goes beyond that. There's also, of course, that component, but her video, this cultural literary landscape, appeals to the intellectuals' kind of nostalgic longing about returning to kind of a 归园田居, returning to nature and showcase a ultimate utopian ideal. But well, many people would say her video is kind of theatrical, and there's no denial there's a kind of theatricality in her video. I think similar to studies about reality shows that people have agreed that audience, they're really not as naive to really believe whatever showcase, for example, in the reality shows are real, or whatever showcase in Li Ziqi's video are completely true or real. But for her video, we observe that the audience, they're willing to temporarily suspend their kind of doubt about the truthfulness of her video, but switch that into the belief of the genuineness kind of delivered through her video, and enjoy this artistry digests that blurs the boundary between art and real life. And for Li Ziqi, in addition to her countryside video, she is the one who is a pioneer in this new forefront. Or I would say she started this new battleground about making videos on Chinese cultural heritage. And this is the one she's making the kind of a movable typing blocks in there. And she also has a serious video that she make the ink, Chinese brush, paper, and inkstone. These are the kind of scholars' four treasures of China, regarded as high cultural symbols in there. So this, in 2019, she also worked together, kind of signed a contract with Gugong at the Palace Museum, and developed her name brand products that supposedly have this be part of reviving the tradition, especially attracting young people. So I think it is from there that she, at least her video, subtly transformed this rural urban difference to the modern kind of tradition disparity. So her video, especially those on the cultural, on the Chinese cultural heritage, even though they're based sort of in the rural landscape, rural environment, but they're more kind of about addressing the anxieties, especially kind of urban people, young people's anxiety regarding a disconnect, a disjuncture with tradition, and seemingly to reignite a fascination with tradition and created an illusion of reconnecting to it. And on that note, I would even say, well, she has this a series of videos about the whole life of certain agricultural product. For example, a whole life of pea, a whole life of tomato, a whole life of potato. I mean, even this video, I would argue, is more about this modern and tradition kind of division. So even though they're about agricultural productions, the fact that she started from kind of the seeds coming out to harvest, the whole process of agricultural process that demonstrated in her video is something that urban views, we consume the final product, but we have no idea how they come into being. So this disconnection with the agricultural tradition, it is also part of the modern and the tradition kind of disjuncture in there. So overall, I think her video constructed a post-industrial kind of cyber cultural space by creating a pre-industrial idyllic and utopian rural life. Well, among all the Chinese rural micro celebrity, Li Ziqi is the one that has the most biggest international reception. But I think if you read the comments of her video to a certain extent, I would say created a secluded. We see, well, she lives almost like a hermit in the mountain, her Sichuan hometown, created this secluded but also isolated, a traditional but also sadly unchanging and a timeless image of not just China but a Orient. So to a certain extent, her video, I think, is consumed because of that. But on this one, I would also kind of pointed out a few new observations. Now we see a lot of kind of a new creators. Like, for example, this young man, he also lives in the countryside, and in this video, he's making the ink stick, well, like Li Ziqi made. And this kind of older man here, and he is in the first two image, he's making paper, and in the next two, he's making the clay movable printing tiles. So they're also making videos about Chinese cultural heritage, but not in addition to them, there are many other ones, but none of them receive the same visibility or publicity, not nearly as what Li Ziqi received. So it really makes me wonder, what exactly are we consuming here? What is the appealing power of it here? Is it a content per se? Is it a subject matter per se? Or is it a creator? Okay, and is it a creator? But and then recently I noticed so neither of them have similar kind of exposure as Li Ziqi enjoys. Recently I found two very young content creator, and this young man, probably in his early 20s, he's also making the ink stick, and he has a lot of followers across different platforms. So earlier I thought it was a gender issue. Maybe the man creator are not being received as well as Li Ziqi, kind of a female creator. But then he made me begin to think: Are we really consuming gender here, or are we also consuming use in this case? Okay, but ultimately, I think my question is does this kind of rural content video really help to bridge the rural-urban gap in contemporary China? Oh, I'd like to hear the other panelists' thoughts about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jian Lin, for your presentation.
Thank you.
And we follow up now with Jian Lin. Hi, Jian Lin.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, my name is Jian Lin, or Lin Jian in Chinese. I'm now assistant professor at Chinese University of Hong Kong. So what I'm going to share with you today is a bit of kind of reflection on creator culture, especially with background in set it in rural China. It's actually based on some of works I have done in the past few years, very early on studies on Kuaishou, and also thanks to Professor Li also mentioned this concept of unlikely creative class. And then to this book about Wang Hong and social media entertainment in China. And more recently, also about new farmers. Professor Li also mentioned this concept. So I will do this quickly, hopefully can stimulate some discussion in the end. But very briefly about this term Wang Hong, sometimes a little bit confusing as it really refers to many different meanings, and also when it's used in different contexts. So sometimes literally it means web read or being read, being popular online. For most of the time we use it to refer to social media creators, but also we use it as a kind of a description or descriptive term to describe particular locations, food, products. Before this talk, of course, we're going to use this term to refer to social media creators, and with a special focus on in rural China, or rural creators. And in the middle, you can also see a picture of Li Ziqi. Professor Li also mentioned her, which I think she's still slowly kind of coming back. But here are a few very popular creators on Chinese social media, and most of them, all of them, have a certain background in rural China. And I think there are a few factors leading to their success. First of all is the digital infrastructure, especially expansion of digital infrastructure since 2015 in rural area. As you can see, these statistics here now over, I think this is already a little bit outdated. By 2021, over 1 billion users, and 99 of them are also mobile internet users. And this is significant because the penetration of mobile internet in China is something quite remarkable. And also over 800 million users of short videos, online payment, and e-commerce. And among them, there are 297 million rural internet users. So it's already penetrated over 60% of the entire rural population. And 88% of them also use short video apps like Douyin or other platforms, Kuaishou as well. And it also contributed to a large sales of agricultural products, mostly through e-commerce, now also live e-commerce. And in terms of fiber optic cables, delivery service, 4G, now also 5G internet, they have covered over 99% of Chinese villages. So it's a very significant development in rural China in terms of digital infrastructure. And the other factor which can explain the success or the popularity of these social media creators from rural China, I think, is with policy and governance. There are a lot of initiatives from the central government and also local government to promote digital economy, and more specifically live streaming, short video, and Wang Hong economy as well. Although this term Wang Hong has never been officially accepted or embraced by the authorities. So they prefer terms like Internet Plus, platform economy, and also in 2015, the then Premier Li Keqiang promulgated this policy called mass entrepreneurship and innovation. And more recently, they have framed this entire digital economy policy as the digitalization strategy, including two parts: digitalization of the industries and also industrialization of the digital. And finally, related to the rural China is this very much hope or agenda of rural regeneration, and especially through digitalization and through digital economy. So we have seen a lot of examples in past years in some rural places. These officials from the local government, they also join live streaming, try to promote local tourism, local agricultural products, etc. But at the same time, in terms of policy and governance, Chinese internet also goes with censorship, especially very heavy censorship in recent years, which leads to a very mounting precarity of creator economy in China. So also recent case of this live streaming and short video creator called Xiu Cai, right, who has been quite popular among we call elderly or middle-aged women, and he also worked in the background in a kind of rural setting, promoting or producing these videos and singing in front of camera, trying to create online intimacy with his followers. But aside from all these factors, I have noticed this cultural dilemma of Wang Hong, especially with the term, referring to this term Wang Hong. As you can see from this paragraph, from this quote from Wang Gang, also a famous creator in China. His reluctance to being recognized, being identified by as a Wang Hong. And this is also shared by many other creators I have interviewed personally, but also we can look online. We can also see a lot of interviews from or with these creators, how they refuse to identify with the term Wang Hong. And to explain this kind of stigma of stigmatization of Wang Hong as an identity, I think it has to do with our popular imagination of Wang Hong, and also the mainstream kind of ideologies or values. So the success and popularity of these grassroots individuals without sufficient or professional training seems to offend the deeply Confucian value placed on education. Ostensibly, Wang Hong also signifies a commercial culture that is depoliticized and non-revolutionary and far distanced from those rebellious youth of the May 4th movement and in the revolutionary era, as well as Red Guard youth active during Cultural Revolution. So individualism and consumerism, they have defined the values and lifestyles performed by today's online influencers and their fans. So that actually might be the reason for this kind of reluctance and also stigmatization. But the question is, if consumerism and commodified entertainment culture embedded in Wang Hong practice is degrading and apolitical, why is it also dangerous and disruptive to such an extent that the party state becomes so wary and censorily intervenes so much? So that's my question. And also another question could be, where can we identify the political and cultural potential or significance of Wang Hong culture or social media culture in general in China? And here I'd like to briefly explain these old concepts, relatively old concepts I worked on previously about the unlikely creative class. It actually speaks to the background of these creators, especially from rural China, how they kind of challenge our more traditional understanding of creative workers, right? Being educated, being urban-based, being fashionable, but creators like Wang Gang and also the other Shogun Gang on the right side, they are mostly situated in a very rural, seemingly authentic background and landscape, and they try to perform in a way that appears to be very authentic Chinese, authentic rural Chinese, speaking with accent or even dressing up as or dressing down as a kind of working class or rural class. And that is kind of changed our understanding of a creative class. So that's why we use this term, the unlikely creative class. But from there, we also try to develop this concept called the unlikely aesthetics, which speaks to the culture or the content produced and circulated among these creators. And to explain that, I think we can also break it down into three parts. First is about authenticity. Second is about the very idea of boredom culture or boredom creativity. And finally is depoliticization. More specifically, if certain content is regarded as authentic, it also denounces either implicitly or explicitly something inauthentic. So the identification of which is both social, historical, and personal, right? So when we say something is authentic, we actually refers to the fact that something else is inauthentic, right? So there is always a comparison. And I think very importantly, if we situate the conception of those culture, of those rural-based creator culture in China, I think the parameter of comparison here, or the other object in this kind of comparison, must be the mainstream, especially more legacy media content, right? So this political aspect can only be being apprehended by unraveling the hidden cultural and political context in which these authenticities are performed and received. So in that sense, I would argue Wang Hong, especially rural Wang Hong culture, offers a significant break with the solemn, predictable content of mainstream, usually state-owned broadcasting media. So the creative repertoire of Wang Hong absorbs everyday experiences from hugely disparate individual backgrounds, including from those rural areas. So those that might be viewed as bizarre, useless, and nonsensical in the mainstream culture are, however, celebrated by their followers as authentic, funny, and creative. And this Wang Hong creativity distinguishes from professional and legacy forms of creativity in the sense that it is arising from the vernacular, grassroots, and banal everyday life. It can be seen as a form of boredom creativity, which means the participation of creators and their followers in the Wang Hong culture. They function as both resistance to and also reproduction of the very state of boredom. I think this requires to think about the context of consumption and also production, right? So why would creators like Wang Gang, Huanong brothers, also mentioned by Professor Li, even Li Ziqi, and also Shou Gonggen, why would they choose to become a content creator in the first place? One possible explanation would be they feel quite bored with their previous jobs, right? Either as a factory worker, as a cook, as a chef in a hotel, or as a farmer, or as any workers working on a 996 kinds of basis. So they feel bored, and also they feel very much kind of alienated from their urban working life. So they choose social media creator as a new profession, as a new dream, although in an imagined way, to pursue. So they want to fight against this very state of boredom. The same also applies to consumers of those culture, right? So they feel bored with what's being popular on mainstream or legacy media. So then they shift their focus to more banal, more grassroots, and even more bizarre and useless types of culture as embodied by Wang Hong culture, especially rural Wang Hong culture. So finally, I think it is less of a form of resistance to speak about the political potentials. It is less a form of resistance. Politics directly changes the power of state and mainstream culture, but more of trivialized practices of discontent with everyday quotidian lives, which can be experienced as boring within the Chinese hierarchical social, culture, and economic order. At the same time, Wang Hong as a career and identity, just like I mentioned earlier, it offers many Chinese a window, although maybe an imaginative window or imagined window from which they may see and experience alternative forms or alternative futures of work and life, which all appear unlikely and grotesque in an offline society where everyone fits a class, profession, gender, or demographic position. So the unlikely aesthetics and their inherent sociality, I would argue, contribute to the authenticity of Wang Hong culture. serving as light-hearted resistance. This is a term I borrowed from Professor Hai Qingyu from Australia. That does not challenge the social and political order, but teases, refuses, and disrupts everyday lives that have been made boring in the real world, in the real world of hierarchy, constraint, and conservatism. I think that's very much everything I want to show here. It's quite it's a very brief introduction to some of the arguments I have made across these different writings, and hopefully we can have more discussion in the end. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jian Lin, for bringing to us an additional perspective to identify the grassroots culture and the rural-urban dilemma, let's say. I would like now to invite Professor Yi Wang to join us. Hi, Yi, welcome.
Hello. Hello. Hi. Thank you, Andre. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me on this session. Really feel honored. Thank you, Professor Lee and Professor Lin. I think the presentation, the topics you actually talk about, like Wang Hong in the rural area, is really fascinating and quite a lot of indications. Although I'm not really in the area of journalism or international communication, but I'm actually from business school. But actually, parts of my research is quite relevant to both of what actually you have talked about. Okay, so my name is Yi Wang. I am associate professor in marketing and tourism at North China of UNNC. So today I'm actually talking parts of my research, which is called rural gentrification and tourism placemaking. I want to very briefly talk about my research background because that actually explains my research pathway and why I'm now interested in the rural development, etc. So in the very beginning, when I first finished my PhD, at that time, my research was just about tourism planning, policymaking. And then after that, I slowly developing my research interests about, rural development, rural tourism. In the rural tourism area, me and my collaborators, we have discussed a lot about like some of the new events, new issues, what happens in the rural area, including like the rural entrepreneurship, including those returnee entrepreneurs. The other part of my research for my own interests, which is relevant to family travel. So that's actually currently my two big area of research interests. One is family travel, the other one is rural tourism. Sorry for this slide, I didn't translate into English, but I actually want to point out very recently, just this a month ago, we just got this title from Ningbo government, which is called Ningbo's Rural Economic and Social Resilience Research Base. So for this research base, we actually included some of the colleagues from FHSS in the economics department, also in the journalism. So if you can read the Chinese, we actually trying to finding out some of the overlaps between the economic resilience and rural resilience in the rural area, in the rural development. So we talk a lot about like digital media. We talk about rural story, rural identity. We also talk about like the hidden gem, which is those handicrafts in the rural area as well. So these are actually the things what I'm been doing, and also I'm interested with. So for the future, if any of you interested to collaborate, I'm really welcome you to email me or communicate directly with me. What I'm going to talk about today is called rural gentrification. Rural gentrification is I can say it is a very relevant concept with what the two professors early on discussed about. particularly for Professor Lee in the very beginning, talk about what actually are happening in the rural area. You see, there are utopia, ideology. They consider that, or that is the reality, whether that's created by a Wang Hong or by a local people. That means people's understanding towards to rurality has been changed. Rural gentrification, for the gentrification, this term was really developed very, very early in 1964. When the term came out at that time, that was being used in London to identify why the middle class people from the city, from the urban area, they want to move to the rural region, and why they are trying to build up a lot of the social upgrades, a lot of the landscape changes in the rural area. So those social spatial patterns of the capital reinvestment and social upgrades are called as rural gentrification. Rural gentrification, it happens in most of the countries. Very originally, of course, all the research about rural gentrification happens in the Western country. But now, if we look at like in China, rural gentrification, of course, is also very, very obvious now. For my research, my study, we actually during the pandemic time, because for the limitation of travel, we locate all our research cases just in Ningbo. In Ningbo, we also have we traveled around in several villages, and those villages we can see they have been changed a lot. Of course, some of the villages you can see they are clean, they are new, they are modern, and some others that you can't even tell the differences between rural and urban. So what actually happens, we call them also as gentrification. If we look at like the first two photos here, at the top, first two top photos, this is the coffee shop in a village near Dongqian Lake. The coffee shop is very, very famous on the social media site, which is called Hello Duck. This Hello Duck only opens during the weekend. From Monday to Friday, they don't have any businesses. And for the weekend, you can't even find the available seat. It's hugely packed for every single weekend. What they offer coffee, they offer tea, they offer quite a lot of Western foods as well. Pizza, spaghetti. They also offer a bit of local food. So the couple who actually runs the coffee shop, they used to be live in this village. And then after they grow up, they went to Ningbo, they went to Shanghai, they work in the city area. And after a few years, they felt that they want to come back again. So they came back to the village and they transformed their old house, become a coffee shop, as you see. And the other two photo, one of them at the left-hand side, at the bottom, is a tea house. Also not very far from Dongqian Lake, but in a very, very quiet village called Liming Village. The right-hand side, this one is in Yanshan Road, number 77. The whole actually street is located at the boundary of this village. And then they have transformed the whole village into a lot of modern Korean restaurants, Korean coffee shops, and of course, coffee and camping, etc., etc. You can't see the old type of village or rural area anymore. So we selected those few different places as our targeted area, our object. We want to see under rural gentrification, what are the perceptions from the local villagers, and what are the perceptions from the tourists, whether tourists like these gentrified places, whether the local people like the transformation. The other three cases, at the top level, top left is, you can see, it's a very interesting place. It is actually a bookstore. It's called Dukehood Bookstore, which is in Xiangshan. In a very small village. Outside of this bookstore, you can see the very old type of village houses, but only this little bookstore just located, embedded into this village. And the other two photos are Xujiashan village in Ningbo. They trying to do the gentrification or transformation actually for the whole village. They make the houses modern. They make them new, and they teach the local villagers how to sell the handicrafts. They all sell some of the local wine, the local foods as well. They want to make the whole village gentrified and look more modern. The bottom right photo, which is in Ninghai, this case is well, it's also at the boundary of a village, but it is actually a not library. It's a museum. It's a very interesting museum there. And the museum, you can see the architecture. They are more Japanese style. They're not really Chinese style. They look very different from the rest of the village. They look stand out, they look differentiated, and sometimes they look weird. So whether these kind of weirdness, these differentiation can increase travelers' interests to go to these places. In the very beginning, definitely. These 7 cases, which are selected because they are highly discussed, they've been highly discussed on all type of social media. We have collected more than 300 different posts on social media, particularly on Little Red Book for each case. And then we analyzed their sort of contents, why people discuss them, why people are interested. Some of them have been there before, some others they don't. Let me just show that to you first. So these are actually what we captured from the social media for some of the main words that we find out. Okay, people consider that, oh, they are interesting because the place let me feel very comfortable. Or the place is interesting because it reminds me with a slow life. It is a fishing village. It is connected. And then quite a lot of people like them because they think they are integrated really well with the local environment, with the village. Even though they look very different, but travelers like them because they represent the imagined rurality towards them. Okay, so from these actually events or these facts, we find out that, well, if we want to talk about the new gentrification, we need to review the previous sort of the concept of gentrification. The early understanding about gentrification have to involve some social displacement, which means people have to immigrate. Some of the new middle-class people have to move to this place. Some others have to move out. So that's displacement is a very important signal in the very early explanation of gentrification. However, more and more often, when we look at the involvement of gentrification, we realize that, well, it's no longer need to have social displacement now. More often, more importantly, it's more about people creating a collective identity and social credentials in this elite enclave. So no matter who actually are creating this gentrification, these people are trying to create a type of elite enclave. And this elite enclave can be considered as the platform for certain locals as well as travelers or visitors. Gentrification, therefore, can be considered or redefined in many different ways. I'm not going to go through all the definition or the development, but more importantly, gentrification nowadays has to be connected with some culture gentrification. That means we are creating certain new cultural spaces. And these cultural spaces, they are located in the rural area. So in our research, we are using a new concept, a new theory called placemaking. Not really new theory. Placemaking is actually quite old theory now. But we actually combined placemaking together with geographical, the sense of place. So we realized that placemaking, they really holds strategic importance in inspiring and mobilizing people and resources. So something important for placemaking, people, resources. Okay, so who are those people? In this rural gentrification, people doesn't just mean travelers or visitors. It also involves the local residents, not only the local villagers, but also the gentrifiers, the people who are initiating this gentrification. So therefore, we have three different categories in the people area. And resources, all different type of people, they will have all kinds of resources. Doesn't have to be cultural resources. It could be also social resources, the local connectiveness, the embeddedness. These would be important for them to construct this place. And later on, this place could be possibly developed into a tourism destination. A very interesting thing is when we have these 7 cases, we realize that they not only all of them would have very positive feedback from both sides, and which one could be more successful in making a place, making a destination. We want to find that out. So therefore, we interviewed some of the owners of these 7 places. We also interviewed some of the local villagers. We interviewed the tourists as well. The whole project has spent quite a long time, over the full year. We traveled to these places. We just sit there and talk to the local villagers who are working nearby, who are passing by, or who are actually just having a tea or coffee in the place. So we talk to them, and the visitors as well. And then we're trying to find out from the social media. These are the from Little Red Book. We sort of find out quite lots of discussion about like the coffee shop, talking about the Hello Duck Cafe, talk about the bookstore, and we try to analyze the wording and also the comments. We compare these together with our interview transcripts, and then we realize that, well, the interesting thing is sometimes the people, the travelers who consider the places are attractive, doesn't mean the local villagers would also consider the place as embedded into the village. They have the gap. And also that gap makes the whole story interesting. We use the coding methods and trying to figure out what actually is happening. Some of the quotes, they say, for example, they say, those new developments are for outsiders, not for us. They look very awkward to me. Imagine Korean buildings and Korean food in our village. I can't link them together. This is from Yanshan Road number 77. And one of the villagers said, he feel really, really awkward when he looks at the places. What actually happened with this case, majority of the local villagers, they really hate, the transformation. They hate the development, and they even build up a wall in between the village and that street. They don't want to see that. So this is actually very, very extreme sort of interfaces or conflicts between the gentrifiers and the local villagers. And the other case, I knew the place, but I didn't know it belongs to Yingjiang. The park is just at the border of the urban rural area. I think that's one of the reasons why many villagers consider it excluded. This one, it also represents majority of the thinking for that particular Yingjiang case. The people there, the villager there, they like it a lot. They even use the gentrified places. They like the facility. They think it's clean, it's modern, and it's interesting to them as well. However, they don't consider them as part of the village. So it's still being excluded, but I can accept it. And the other three cases are opposite. Particularly the other two cases, the villagers would prefer to consider that as part of the village, although they are different. They can consider and accept the differences. Some of the villagers also pointed out that, particularly for that tea house, the villagers said, I can even enjoy the relaxation there. I can go there and to have conversation with the owner. I like the atmosphere. And also, I like to see different visitors coming here. So it's actually making the gentrification quite successfully embedded into the village. And then after that, because for time reason, I can't explain the full picture, but we have done a conclusion or summary on different type of sense of place based on the visitors, based on the locals. And you can see from tourists' side, they could consider the place as just as a tourist attraction. If that is the tourist attraction, I can visit there, and I don't have to be a repeated customer, but I can visit that because I'm interested in. On the other hand, the tourists can also consider the place as a third place. The third place actually means that the tourists consider that as a part of their living style, their life. So therefore, they consider it as a very cohesive rurality. They would go there and go there, repeatedly, meeting friends, meeting family, making it become a kind of an event. For the locals, they can consider as the place as exclusive, even with discrimination. So I don't like it at all, and I would be really against. Otherwise, I could exclude them, but I can accept it. I can engage with them. Further, the local people can feel really cohesion with a lot of connectedness embedded into it. They can also having the cohesion, but with a little bit self-consciousness. That means, well, that is part of us, but I still feel a little bit different from what they are doing in there. So based on that, we then summarizing that having the sense of third place in the rural area is very important, because nowadays rural area is very near the urban. So rural area has the potential to become a third place for people from the urban area. That means it's in between my workplace and my home. It's in between them. The third place provides some of the relaxation and provide regular relaxation. So for example, British people, they would choose certain pubs as the third place. Every weekend, every Saturday, I can meet up with my pals and in the pub nearby, have a drink, have a pint. That's called third place. And rural area also has the potential to provide that. Okay, so the whole project, we've been trying to figure out that, first of all, what people consider is rurality, because the concept, the definition has been changed and twisted. Secondly, after those gentrification comes over, whether we have the power or whether people, local people and visitors has the co-creation in tourism placemaking. And then after that, what will be the ideal tourism placemaking scenario? Yeah, so this is basically the ongoing project, and we are still finalizing some of the results, and hopefully can make the publication as soon as possible. So thank you very much.
We continue with Francesca Valsecci. Thanks, Francesca. Francesca, she will be on site, so she will also, you can meet her directly from here.
Thank you, Andrea. Good afternoon, good evening, actually, and thanks, Andrea, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and I think between the exhibition and the sharing of and the three sharing before me, I had quite of a interesting understanding, and also some ideas that came to my mind. So maybe I will change a little bit the presentation on the go. I speak from a very different perspective, like not really presenting a study that is ongoing, but more a reflection on what has been my practice in the Chinese countryside for the past few years, and also try to look a little bit forward in like what is the space of creation between city and rural. So I was, it's quite, at the exhibition is very nice to see all of this territory. And coming from a design background, we work on intervening on those territories. So I was collecting a lot of reflection. And what I want to share, it's this element of introducing the idea of an ecological entanglement. I work mainly in urban regeneration, and when we translate in Chinese urban regeneration, people usually use the word genxin, like making something new, and then we translate it as a zaisheng, like a process of revitalizing with a sense of vitality that comes from organic and a natural element. And this is, I think, is important not only for the urban, but also for the rural. I think the ecological thinking should be at the center of any regeneration process, and somehow it's a software part. Like I saw the exhibition, there is all of this fabulous planning of different cities, and from the design perspective, I kind of want to talk a little bit about what is the software part that is that we include in this territory. And so I will share 3 points. One is like what happens if you include an ecological thinking into the territory. And so this is the place where we are. This is Yangtze, the map of the Yangtze area, and I come from Shanghai, and I kind of cross a little bit. But this is not really, like, this is the territorial map. But if we look at it from an ecological perspective and take all of the layers of the built environment away, he appears in this ecological identity, which is the one of a very large wetland area with a lot of waterscape. And this is what creates the real nature of the countryside element between all of the cities that stays around in the Yangtze Delta. And we very rarely look at maps that look like this, even though we cross these territories very almost every day with all of our high-speed train. And but this is a element. I think this is an element that is important to think about how we want to plan or how we want to organize this territory. And this was a decade ago. At the time I was working in the country, I was living and working in the countryside. This was the 2009, 2010 planning strategy of Shanghai government of creating 1 city and 9 towns. So looking at this horizontal layer that also the exhibition talk about, but in a very fragmented way. So the 9 towns were separated, and somehow there was, and this was an answer to this decaying countryside where everybody wanted to leave to come to downtown Shanghai, and was like not sustainable anymore. But at the same time, also a decade ago, there was a policy that was about how the future of the countryside must be, and was a very famous policy also with some big professors. I remember Wen Tiejun from Renmin University that was talking about the importance of the Sannong, like the 3 elements that are connected to agriculture: the Di, like the land; the Ye, which is the business, like the agribusiness; and the Min, which is the farmers, like the people that living in the countryside. And so the problem of China 10 years ago, one of the questions was like how we keep this 3 levels together in terms of innovation. And I believe that this question is still very much intricated. And I think that the problem of the Shandong was interesting because it was posed in an ecological mindset of a system where the parts, so the inhabitants and the land, the landscape and the territory, and also the outcomes and the strategy that comes from the countryside should be somehow integrated in the same way of thinking and planning. And so if we're thinking about the territory with an ecological lens, that we have to talk about bioregion. So the bioregion, which is it's something that defines the space between the city and the countryside, and like connected from an ecological perspective, is a sort of liminal zone where transformation happen, as we see in the exhibition, but is also a learning zone where city and countryside can mutually communicate and also influence each other. This is a work that I did a couple of years ago with some colleagues. That reminds me, I mean, it was a very good connection with the points of the village. This is a satellite extraction of all of the green spaces around the city. We only use the data of Shanghai, but you see the city only by the area that are green in the city, which is something that also it's a very unique, holistic kind of view. And then you can also see a lot of the green area that are clearly connected to the very dense countryside environment around the city. But then we associate the analysis of this map to some more sociological type of investigation in what is the level of satisfaction, or what is the level of depression, or what is the level of anxiety, or what is the level of health in the different community. And it's quite interesting that as much as in some community that live downtown, being close to the green means that you are happier because somehow you have a distraction or an escape or a sense of health. In the countryside area, the numbers were decreasing. And so the presence of nature or the exposure to the countryside is really not connected to a general well-being. And that's definitely more investigation that need to be done. But this makes me think that there is not only an ecological sense of the territory, but also of what is the lifestyle. And I was really inspired by the 3 people that spoke before me. I started to work in 2008 on a project that is called Design Harvest in Chongming Island, where we were working and living. And the idea was to use design to try to create bridges between city and countryside, and to somehow create opportunity for both of the sides. At the time, we had we wanted to move to the idea of making bridges between two separate sides, to the idea instead of connecting integrated level. And so also thinking at the countryside as one of the very strong energy and the very strong engine of China as a country. And we were doing project with paid by Nokia, in which we had to figure it out how to use the GSM network to support rural entrepreneurship in the farming. In 2008, there was very few smartphone, no smartphone in the countryside, no Xiaohongshu, no Instagram, no WeChat, any of this techno entrepreneurship that we saw before. And what we were producing as designer were rice, like starting from talking with the farmer and bring learning experience to move them towards an idea of sustainable agriculture, meaning organic product, meaning try to use less of chemical and try to create a sort of rural economy that was based on value. It's also quite interesting to say that not many farmers in China own the land. So at least in the area of Chongming where I was working, most of the farmers were actually contractors, like kind of like blue collar, but instead of being in a factory, they were on a big farming organization. So at the time we were working really a lot. This was kind of like my studio at the time. And we were working a lot on food networks. And so try to really push what was the reflection of the city as a place that cannot sustain the nutrition for the people that inhabit the city, and countryside. And this is an example of a Rainbow of Hope or Biofarm, or like projects that are not only about producing food, but also about like producing knowledge that come from the countryside. But then we realized that food was only one of the aspects, and that this was also like very much limited to a kind of a consumption, even though a very basic consumption. And so the project, like there was an evolution of project that was like, okay, how much like how a urban rural future lab would look like. And so this is something we start to work on 2019 in Jian, like in the west of Shanghai, where we try to create a space where we could showcase how much the horizontal liminal space between city and countryside could look like according to all of this aspect of lifestyle. So not only food, but also living, clothing, and feeding and learning, and soil, like kind of the connection with the nature. So the countryside as a learning canvas from the city, where people can relearn things that they've forgotten by living in the urban life. And so we were also looking at what I call a growing identity for farmers. And I was amazed by the presentation before me, but for us, this was more interesting instead that the Wang Hong or like the celebrities of the social media, like really looking at how the small farmers were recreating a sort of identity based on extremely localized value of the process and the food that they were producing, and somehow with this Taobao platform that became a sort of university of practice for the local farmers. So even though there are people that are very rich with the social media mechanism, there is also just a lot of people that are basically reaching the threshold of what is a economic sufficiency of their lifestyle. And then the third point, I think that is very important to talk, and I was a little bit also surprised that I haven't heard about, we didn't spoke too much about agriculture, even though we are in a place that is discussing countryside relationship, but something that it should be brought at the forefront is that there is no possibility of a urban-rural, sustainable, economical ecosystem. When I think about economy as the capacity of managing the resource of the house in a very kind of traditional ancestral sense, is that there must be a discussion about soil. So this horizontal space of connection is something that needs to be based on the fact that we look at the soil, which is what is make the main matter in between city and countryside and beyond, and the bio value of the soil and the bio value of the health that somehow comes out, not only for the territory, but also for the lifestyle. So at the center of the exhibition that the school did. This was organized by John Thackeray, which is a British philosopher, very passionate about the rural futures. And at the center of this exhibition, with all of these hundreds of examples from all over the world, there were bays of different soil that was picked up by in the countryside that you could go there and smell and touch and experience in their variety. And the connection between health and soil has been done by many artists, philosophers, and practitioners over the years, but the story is the same. So in this horizontal landscape that we create, and for some people could be more driven by economical interests, for some people could be more driven by a sort of like new idealistic lifestyle, like a post-urban sort of life. These stories still remain intricate. So as long as we don't put the soil as the center of what we are studying, we're not going to go that far. And luckily, we are in a country that has been created a lot of knowledge. And I saw also in the exhibition some example about permaculture. Like the solutions are out there, and it probably is more of a way to like coordinating them and to take some decision making. Like John Thackeray also speaks in a very nice way about the transition from the oil age to the soil age. So we preoccupied ourselves for many years to get our oil, to extract the oil outside of the land, and now we should think about what is the quality of the soil that we actually have in the land to kind of like move forward. So I very gratefully got this slide from him. And so in this horizontal landscape, I think we need to have we need to think about our agroecology models. So in between this transition in between this social media sort of bubbling situation and this gentrification movement of the reconstruction and the planning intervention, the agroecology models are what they can sustain the ecosystem, and not otherwise we all move to the countryside because it's beautiful, but then we still have the problem that we don't know what to eat, and we don't know how to sustain our health, because everything around us is not necessarily polluted, but it's just dead, which is the kind of the next stage. So I'm also here happy to create relationship, and I will probably follow up with each of you with some ideas, but there is a sort of there are kind of like three propositions of the way that we can be ecologically entangled. And this is a grant application that we're writing for a Europe-China cooperation project. And there are some ideas that come from the territory, like basic idea of the territory on agroecology, thinking about a lifestyle. So rethinking business model and looking at the soil as a form of as a way to apply ecological justice. And maybe this is a way for us to continue the conversation after in the discussion, but also beyond, after the exhibition finish, and we can stay in touch. And this is my friend Jian that was explaining me things about the goats a few years ago. Thank you.
Okay. So I give now the floor to Filippo Girardi and Ricky Wu to start the discussion. Thank you very much, Francesca, for your wonderful presentation and for linking many concepts with the horizontal metropolis as well.
Thank you very much for all presenters. Very interesting presentation points. So I will start probably by taking the final question that Jian Lin suggested, and I will try to change it a little bit and try to challenge a little bit the question. So the question was, do these rural culture videos help to bridge the urban-rural gap in contemporary China? And I will change that on, do these rural culture videos, but also not only the video, these third spaces that Wang mentioned, so are actually increase the gap instead of actually work as a bridge. It seems to me that what Francesca suggests, which is called learning spaces. Learning spaces seems to be spaces that, yes, they help to bridge the gap. But actually, the other one seems to be spaces of consumption where people go consume but don't really experience the countryside. In the video seems to be an idealized countryside. In the villages, it seems people go in this coffee shop but don't really experience anything else. It's not the space itself or the idealization of the rural itself. So that will be my question. What do you think about that?
Probably I can before we let the reflections from the presenters to just touch on that issue. For me, I think it is a question almost all the papers. You know, a key question that kept on coming up for me was the question of authenticity. It was very interesting, kind of loud in itself, because I think Professor Yuan was very much asking about, is there authenticity in here? And I think Jan's work also was asking about the authenticity that is coming through. That maybe there is a problem with the question of authenticity. And I think the first paper from that is Jian Lin, on one hand was providing that idealism that I think, Filippo, you're talking about, but the underlying issue for me was, again, authenticity, that are the staged videos and productions. How authentic is that in the conversation about bridging? So I was thinking very much about, actually, maybe there is a little less bridging here, because, again, the question of authenticity was so loud in that respect. So maybe yield the floor to the presenters to make a comment on that.
I think, David, I really agree with you. Because I was the third presenter, then when I finished listening the first two, Professor Lee and Lin, yes, authenticity, it just jumps out. And then I was thinking, for my research or my in the end, actually, authenticity is the topic. So how do we look at rurality? Whether the rural is still the rural we consider? What is the understanding towards that? When I look at like Professor Lee's presentation, and I was thinking, well, is that kind of what we call staged authenticity? So that's probably not the one we used to consider. And then after Professor Lin's discussion, I was thinking, well, probably every single person has their own understanding towards rurality. So authenticity doesn't really have a kind of definition or something. It probably has been also transformed to really personalized. But what we actually really looking at, what is the idealized rural area, what we talk about.
Thank you. I would like to kind of follow up addressing this issue of authenticity. I would say, first of all, Dr. Lin's discussion about the idea of authentic, and there must be an idea of inauthenticity. It is very inspiring. I think to a certain extent, these kind of grassroots videos, they are not rebellious, they're not revolution, but they're definitely a resistance to what has been kind of broadcasted, especially in the mainstream media regarding as the countryside. So in that sense, that authenticity makes sense. That is vis-a-vis the other type of representation. But also, I think in at least in some of the prominent Wang Hong videos, even though they brand authenticity about their video, but they all subtly change or subtly transform the authenticity to genuineness. So to a certain extent, the authenticity, they're not claiming the authenticity is about the country life, is about countryside, even though the audience may receive so. But they're claiming that they're representing the authentic themselves on the screen. And this authenticity is the genuineness, is the crudity of their video, is the amateurish of their video, or even it is this constructed theatricality that is mutually acknowledged by the creator and the receiver.
Professor Han, let me come in there a little bit quickly. I mean, it is actually not the crudity of their videos, because the videos look well curated. So it is not. If you look at the dressing itself, dresses are clean. Sometimes the gown looks very professional. And my understanding of rural life, the way I may imagine it, is not somebody who has a lovely, nice, high street garb that looks quite clean. So it's actually not as crude as you may want to point out. And the beautiful makeup, and I mean, I'm not saying girls in the countryside don't do makeup, but the beautiful makeup in the gardens, that is not crude. That is, and as I think Professor Jian was talking about, was almost staged to a T. And I think there is an element there, because Professor Jian was talking about the notion of governance, and one of the things that is missing here is that there a relationship between government, local authority, who also want to promote rural tourism, with the content creators. It is as if that the local government does not exist, apart from the fact that Jian talked about the possibilities of being censored when you don't say the right thing. But in essence, the elephant in the room here is, the fact that the local government can also be very promoting of these, what you would call influencers, in simply speaking.
I think, first of all, from my understanding, I agree with Professor Lee about her take on authenticity. I think it's really about the production, performance, and performativity of authenticity. And also, this authenticity not only refers to the place, the space, but actually to the question of self, to how to present yourself as an authentic self. So when we take that into account, either as creators like Wang, who used to be a chef, a cook, or to the other guy I also mentioned, like Shou Gonggang, who try to perform as a kind of mechanic engineer, but in a very humorous, very useless way. So they all dress not necessarily as a farmer, but they try to stick to the kind of image as similar to their previous profession. So in that sense, it's how they perform the authenticity of themselves. So that, for me, is very interesting, because we cannot claim easily, especially through the lens of media, we cannot necessarily claim something as really authentic. But what's interesting for me is how they produce, how they work on this discourse of authenticity to convince their audience, to convince their viewers to become part of their online community. And finally, either for monetization or just for their own kind of online career. I think the second point here is also, I think, David, right? You also mentioned about the question about governance, especially this tension between local authorities and these creators. And I also did some field work with some villages, and I went to their government, local government, and I see it's very interesting in Zhejiang province, especially. Almost every village has a kind of live streaming room set up by the local officials, and they invite local entrepreneurs or local creators to collaborate with them, try to promote not only the local image, but also to promote local agricultural products. I think that's very interesting. I interviewed some local entrepreneurs as well, like new farmers as well. And sometimes they say, well, these local officials, they are supportive. They try to help us. But it's very hard to tell whether these kind of official support is really efficient or not. because there is a mismatch in terms of expectation from both sides. For the officials, of course, they want to have a good image of themselves, but this good image, the definition of good image of self is very different for the local officials, local governments, and for these entrepreneurs. For entrepreneurs, apparently they want to, first of all, if you want to become a successful creator online, you need to, again, very much work on the idea of authenticity of self, right? But for local authorities, their definition of authenticity of self is very much about how to beautify our local countryside, how to send a very positive, beautiful image to the outsiders that we are doing very well as officials. So sometimes there is clash, there is mismatch, but sometimes there's also harmony. I see also examples of how these two sides get along with each other very well, but there are also a mismatch happening quite often.
To answer the question, I have some suspect that maybe the gap is increased, but not having so much deeper understanding between the difference of what is authentic or what is genuine, or not being able to discuss it in this way. I think that the increase of the gaps come from the fact that I really think like the agriculture part is kind of cut away from the rural, from the like the, in the rural space there is no agriculture anymore, or there is the agriculture that is somehow a narrative, like a positive story. I mean, sanitized. I don't like this. I mean, I follow Wang like regularly. It's like is my master of Chinese cooking, and so. But for me, Wang is very far away from an idea of countryside. This is a cook, and I tried to went to visit Xiaogo at her village. I was scouting in Yunnan, tried to find where was the house, because I was curious at that thing. But the reality is that like farmland are dirty, unclean, and full of hardship, and there is no space for this element in the story. So I think in that sense, yes, they increase the gap, and so and for that reason. I think also one of the reasons why they don't speak about the story is because that is a story of if not poverty, at least of unhealth. And so that's why I think that the way in which I'm proposing this ecological reflection is to try to move from the idea of a market, of kind of like economical value of things, and looking at something that is more systemic, in which maybe there is more space for people to not being divided, but to to reconverge in some other level. I mean, the soil is authentic and is genuine at the same time. So in that sense, I think the question that you're posing is interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think we are all, there is an elephant in the room that is what is the rule? Like, is this a rule that is kind of like a better city idea, or is a rule that is a kind of really a meeting point?
Francesca, the agroecology model. I mean, I was trying to think about the agroecology model, but I was also kind of struck that isn't this more of a what you call a rural project more than an urban project? I mean, in some very heavily built up cities, you don't find that sometimes it's what you call the concrete jungle, right? And so is it not difficult to talk about agroecology in the jungle city, and more we can talk about it generally in rural areas? But so isn't there rather, again, the gap that agroecology is reinforcing the gap that yes, this is workable and feasible within the rural settings, but let's just move on in the urban centers and do something else. So I thought that in itself is kind of, there is a very clear, distinct gap between them.
Yes, I make an answer and I give you an example. Because I work mainly in urban environment, and we have a place that is called Urban Ecology Lab, in which we work with the community on trying to have this learning space about nature in the urban jungle. So The idea of agroecology is actually not related to the production of agriculture, but it's related to the system of knowledge that you need to make land fertile. And so this include, of course, the farming as we know it, as something that produces vegetable and fruit or live living stocks, but it's based on the idea that you understand ecosystemic relationship. And so in that sense, yes, your observation is very right, but in the practice, you can have an agroecology that is not productive in the city because maybe you don't have land, but is working on other elements of the ecosystem. And if I'm thinking about what I'm studying and what I'm seeing in research recently, I have 15 major cities around the world that are working on urban biodiversity, which is at the basis of agroecology only in the countryside because the systems are not isolated. And the project that we're doing is of a beehive in the community where some citizens want to destroy it and some citizens want to save it. And we're trying to figure it out in which way we can like work on the bees, which are there by themselves. Nobody brought them there. They just like native to the courtyard. So in that sense, yeah, the agroecology is a little bit more, and so it blur a little bit the distance. Then you could have a form of agroecology productive in the city based on a certain kind of model of agriculture, which are not substitutive in a way. But permaculture is a great instrument to be used in the city because you are really creating economy out of the land work. So that's like a good opportunity.
I think it was Andrea that.
Yes, I would like to like link some comment that maybe you cannot see me, but I'm here. First of all, thank you very much for initiating this engaging discussion. The assumption that I will have at the moment is that the conceptualization of the countryside still something that remain an idea. No, the idea is a Greek word which means I've seen. So it's something that each one has seen and is trying to define from different perspectives, and sometimes beyond, if you want a very clear definition of what can be the countryside, because the countryside is an hyperspace. In fact, it's a space that is not necessarily identified by farming, also because farming is, if you want, the most polluting actually way of production that we have. So paradoxically, it contradicts this vision of a pastoral countryside. But countryside is also a place where we have a million of people fully interacting with the urban context. And it's still this place where we're trying to identify a language. People need to identify a language to be accepted, if you want, or understood. And we are trying to identify the way to define these spaces. And so, in my opinion, this is what is emerging also from different presentations. In this continuous attempt to define the space of this horizontal metropolis, extended metropolitan region, which embedded the countryside, we're also trying to define the people in there. And this brings again with the idea of authenticity, as Jian Lin said, your own self. Because its own self has to be mediated by something that has to be accepted by someone else, and normally are the citizen. And here I recognize somehow with Wang, when we're talking about the placemaking, this place that looks like a passive space in which we need to inject a sense, inject something that makes these spaces attractive. And at the same time with Professor Jian Lin, with this idea of a micro-celebrity, which are twisted through a very normative way of representation. So I think at the moment that we really try to do the effort to accept first, let's say, or recognize the integrity of this space, then we can start to go beyond this dualism and provide or perhaps define a more comprehensive way to understand the space of contemporary time, which is a mixed space between urban and countryside. Thanks. It was just a comment.
Let's just a quick one to the audience who is online. Now, if you want if you want to advance a specific question to the presenters, I think feel free to type it out, and probably one of the presenters will be reading it and respond to that. So for the audience that is online, please do type your question if you want, or probably you could do the whole, raising your hand. I think if you want to just speak the question, you could just raise your hand and we should be able to bring you in. So yes, the reactions to the others, please.
Okay, I'll go back to the concept of authenticity that I've heard a lot, and I was thinking about it. I wouldn't ask anyone to tell me what is authenticity in the context of China, because I have myself many doubts. Then I heard, and more specifically, even the concept of staged authenticity, and I was thinking that this is at least became famous in the 70s with the McConnell, the tourist. This idea, the tourist is exactly looking for this stage authenticity as the key experience. And what I'm wondering is, of course, my question is firstly for our three presenters online who have this deep knowledge about what is going on, for example, in the tourist market in China. If these, if what we are seeing now is the same is the same mechanism that was observed 50 years ago. And let's say what is different, maybe just that now we have social media. 50 years ago, we had other ways of promoting territory, etc. Or if there is something unique, exceptional, let's say, about these today in China. One thing I have in my mind is that tourism is still a domestic issue from my perspective in China, because the number of international tourists, even pre-pandemic, was smaller than that Italy or Spain receive every year, and we know which are the size of the countries. So my question is exactly this: if you feel there is beyond this update in the media that are available, anything else that make these unique and different from phenomena that have been observed quite a lot of decades ago?
Thank you very much for your question. If I think if we consider about like 50 years ago and now, particularly for the urban rural or rural tourism, of course there are lots of different changes. One of the biggest changes, to be honest, I think the boundary between rural and urban has been really blurred in the past 50 years. And until now, people's understanding towards rural area, what is a rural area, has been completely changed. So like Professor Lee talked about like rural village, right? So we all talk about nowadays the village, the social structure has been also changed. Agriculture is no longer the main part of the industry in the rural area. Rural area now struggling to, or not really struggling, but actually challengingly finding out other replaced industries or sectors to revive the economy. So therefore, nowadays, if let me sort of use the examples or cases, I would say, well, nowadays tourism is more important for rural area comparing to 50 years ago. Now we talk about like agro-tourism. We talk about the combination between agriculture and tourism. However, if we really look at what is happening right now in the rural area, agriculture is definitely coming down if comparing to tourism industry in rural area. One of the reasons is because, young laborers now, they do not really look at the value of agriculture in the rural area. I remember we went to Sichuan and Chongqing to some, because nowadays in China we cannot call poverty rural areas anymore. We only can call like less developed areas in rural villages. So we went to those so-called less developed rural villages in Sichuan and Chongqing, and we've been really touched and impressed with the local development. It's not about they have a lot of economic development in rural area, but we can see a lot of young people coming back to the villages, comparing to like Zhejiang province. When we think about like Zhejiang province, the economy level is quite high. However, young people, they don't like to go back to rural area for all kinds of reasons: jobs, education, hospital, medical services, etc., etc. But then for those less developed area, young people, they like to go back. After they finish the degree in the big city, they went back to their hometown because they have their emotional connections towards those villages. They say, I want to do something different in there. So that's why I think in a way I can understand those Wang Hong, so-called rural Wang Hong series. They maybe in the very beginning they're not really purposely to do Wang Hong. They just want to promote something, promote their hometown, promote the rurality they understand, and then after that, develop step by step. Yeah. So if you really talk about the differences between 50 years ago and 50 years now, I would say the social structure in the rural area has been completely changed. And then that social structure has resulted into industry, economy development, and a lot of other, different things.
I actually have a follow-up question for Dr. Wang. It's also about the difference, but it's not about the China's countryside now versus 50 years ago, but about the China versus things you brought up, the concept of rural gentrification. China with England, this rural gentrification. My understanding is that when this concept, again, I'm not in social science and very ignorant about that subject. When this concept was brought up in England, there is this kind of a migration to live in the countryside, which leading to the rural gentrification. But we see in the Chinese situation, especially in some of the cases you showcased to us, indeed, this young people, either they're originally from the countryside and go back, or even they're city dwellers who decided to develop a new business in the villages. But this gentrification largely and essentially rely on tourism. Like for the coffee shop you mentioned, they're not even open Mondays through Friday. They're only open on weekends. So these gentrification are not even sustainable in itself if it were not for the tourism. And most of the tourists, I would guess, are from the urban area. There are kind of a weekend getaways. So in that sense, I was wondering if that is a difference. And you also mentioned the concept of third place. I found that very, very interesting. And when I was looking at these videos, I couldn't help but thinking that these videos, to a certain extent, they are the mediated third place. So for a lot of urban consumers, urban dwellers, they're not necessarily going to the countryside to experience it or going to the third place to experience it. However, this gentrified kind of a video about the rural landscape, about the rural life, serves as a third space for them to have a mediated experience of the country life.
Yeah, I the same thing. I also really like your presentation and your topics, because I think it's really relevant to what I'm actually looking at. So for the first question, I think gentrification in Western country and also gentrification in China are completely different. one of the major differences is the social displacement. In Western sort of concept, social displacement is the must for gentrification, because people, different social class, middle class, they move to the rural area. They want to create their backyard garden, for example. They sort of have the property there. They move there, or they spend the weekend there. So that's called gentrification. And in China, what we realized that, of course, that's traditional gentrification also exists in China. This is for sure. We also have the social displacement in quite a lot of places. Some of my friends, for example, they also moved to the rural area because not because it's cheaper, but because they like the rurality. They want to have their own fantasy, sort of utopia, rurality, this lifestyle. So they want to change the lifestyle. They move to that. But the cases this time we use, they are in a very different type of gentrification. They cannot be called as a complete gentrification because they are only culturally gentrified. Well, which means during the research, there are lots of visitors. They are repeated visitors go to these places. They say, well, me and my friends, we talked to each other and we said we will come back every month to the same place in order to meet with each other, to have the discussion and to enjoy this rurality. So this particular place become a third place for me and my friends to meet up. And then for the local people, it's the same thing. Like Xujiashan village, we find out a lot of villagers, they like the transformation because they say, well, it becomes part of our lifestyle. So now I know there is a very new coffee shop. I'm a villager, I'm a farmer, but I also drink coffee, which is really, modern for me. And I drink the coffee actually every morning, which we can find quite a lot of, lifestyle changes. And these impacts are actually brought over by these culturally gentrified places. Yeah. So that actually also related to your second question. I think these are actually very newly happened sort of phenomenon in China. So they would have their own features or characteristics, very different from others. But it also makes that could be quite interesting because in our cases, we find out like one single coffee shop can also be the gentrified place. We see the whole village can be the gentrified village. So it can be like enclave. This enclave can be very small, also can be very big. The original third place concept is actually from geography, so which I think is quite relevant to explain the whole situation.
There is a point that Francesca here made. It was an interesting one, and I think I want a reflection from Jian Lin. Francesca kind of said that the countryside is not equal to the good life, or automatically to the good life. And I would like to kind of, ask Jian Lin here to kind of comment on that, because in part of your presentation, and you talk about governance, and you kind of raise the question of why is the local authority a little wary about the influencers, quote unquote? Is it because there is an acknowledgement that perhaps it's not all bed and roses in the countryside?
Yeah, thank you, David. I think I agree the point you raised, also referring to Francesca about the we cannot simply equal rurality as good life, or a lot of imagination in between, right? Try to make this articulation. And I was trying to address this question about why the authorities are so wary of Wang Hong content and constant censorship, the entire regime of online regulation. And partly my answer lies in this analysis of the political potential of Wang Hong culture, or the term I borrow from Haiqing Yu from IMIT, called lighthearted resistance. And that also maybe goes back to Francesca's point about rurality, or about especially rural society, rural area in China, or rural China, to put it simply. So what we see, all these media representations and also imaginations of rurality, and they all try to describe rurality as something that is either spectacular, either creative, either fun, or either like kind of idealistic, right? But these imaginations, they also point to, again, it's about comparison. So if we see rural China through these lenses as authentic, then something inauthentic is also assumed about either urban society, either, as I said, legacy media, or either the kind of the official discourses, the official imagination of rural China. So there is a contrast here. And then this kind of hidden or implicit comparison is where the political potential of Wang Hong culture, I think, really exists. So that's something that's my argument in these writings, especially with regard to this concept of the unlikely aesthetics. But also I want to add a little bit about this argumentation. I think there are two things. First is these creators that I have analyzed, also mentioned by Professor Li, I believe, this is only a very minority group of rural citizens in China. I think it's the whole market of creator economy in China is very competitive, highly exploited, also very much dominated now by capital supported MCNs or multi-channel networks. So the industry is not as ideal as it may always try to describe. So there is those interesting stories of kind of social mobility brought by social media entertainment or creator economy in China. But also the reality is quite cruel as well. I think this also speak back to the reality in real China. I agree with Professor Wang Yi, your point about this changing dynamic in rural China right now, a lot of gentrification. But I think if we look at the vast territory of China, especially the vast territory of rural China, we shift our attention from Zhejiang to more western area in China. I think the rurality is still quite cruel in many areas that I have been to, and also from other representations. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's my elaboration.
That's answer for you, right, Filippo?
Yeah, I can continue on that point probably, and mention two words that were mentioned, but we didn't really look at that are certainly of tension for how long as I know in China. One is the idea of ethnicity that is also linked with the ethnic minorities, and there is a lot of, and the other one is cultural heritage. So there is a lot of video, for example, online. We saw some of them mentioned today, where there is a commercialization of the cultural heritage, at times made by the people from the minority themselves, other times by Han majority that somehow use online and commercialize the cultural heritage of the other people. So I think that is one of the probably of the reason for the tension. So Lin, I think you mentioned that in your presentation.
The use of our, I think Professor Filippo is talking about the use, the cultural heritage, the question of the cultural heritage, and of course the use of ethnic culture, sometimes commodified and used as part of the tourism discourse that is created. Again, I guess it goes back to the question of authenticity, but yes, a comment to that.
I have a story, which is like one of the things we were used to do in Chongming Island. It's not only the food, but it was also, they do this bamboo weaving technique that like they do a lot of product made with that thing. And so one of the idea was like, okay, how can we create like a design system, like a product service system that would make this object to become more interesting for the people in the city. And then it was quite interesting to clash with the fact that these are objects that maybe they cost 5 kwai, maybe they cost 3 kwai, they cost like they cost nothing. And so whatever would have been the product service system to create around that would have been a margin of cost that it would have been impossible to benefit the people that were actually making the product. And it was really not easy to find like a business model that could sustain the people that were doing the things. And so, and then we said, okay, well, there's something about cultural heritage that maybe is maintaining and preserving and having more people that understand the weaving and the bamboo thing. And so there was one of the greenhouse in our field that was dedicated to activity. So where you could go and you could like stay for your like a sort of like agritourism in the place, and then the experience and maybe come and take courses about this. And then the local government decided that greenhouse would have been destroyed because only greenhouse with the purpose of producing food would have been allowed on the land of the village. And so the space that was kind of the learning space between the cultures in a way was not able to exist anymore. And so the story is just to say, so far we failed, but that's like a reality element. So maybe the authenticity in the way that is narrated is the only way to keep those traditions alive in one way or the other.
Oh, no. Hanley, I think Hanley is there. That was the question for Hanley, right? On the issue of authenticity is in my head. On the issue of our cultural heritage and ethnic, appropriation.
Who controls the narrative, right?
Yes. Cultural appropriation, ethnic heritage appropriation in the videos.
Well, I think if I hear the answer correctly, like let's use 电西小哥 for an example. She started her video with making dishes that really showcase the local ethnic or very unique ingredients. And that like the pork liver image that I show at the beginning, that really becomes very attractive to some viewers. But what I noticed that also the very first lady that branded herself as the new farmer, she is also from Guizhou, one of the minority ethnic group. But what at least I noticed that gradually, sort of this minority ethnicity element are not as sustainable for them to make a long-term video production out of that. And then eventually they sort of all transferred into a relatively generic, and in 电西小哥's case, very gentrified formula of video production. I guess I was saying that to a certain extent, at one point, that element, that dimension becomes kind of winding down, becomes kind of minimized. And I have a sorry, I wanted to quickly go back to Dr. Lin mentioned. I really appreciate that he pointed out the content creators that both he and I kind of enjoy watching and discussed. There are a very small group, in fact, a very small group of digital creators. There are also a very small group of rural content creator, right? In kind of a creative power in general, and also the rural one. But the fact that them, and especially some of them, has such big visibility, has such big publicity, is something that we wanted to think further about. Are they, I guess the question is, are they really having that big exposure, or it is really because we are so limited in our vision, we are so limited in our horizon that we actually think they have such a big publicity? While in reality, they're really a small group of content creators.
Well, I think a lot of people may be wanting to go for dinner already, so we don't want anybody to be very mad at us. I would like to take this opportunity, me and Philip would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Han Li, to thank Professor Jian Lin, Professor Francesca here, and Professor Wang, who's gone, for the very, very informative talks. I have been very ignorant, but at least I'm leaving today with a bit of understanding about, about the subject of conversation today. And of course, we would like to thank the audience who are online for your patience. And we hope to continue this conversation tomorrow, but also would like to take the opportunity to thank the organizers' exceptional work that has gone into this event. So thanks you once again, everybody, and good evening.